what do you think? RoYouth. And she's like, has a good ring to it. What is it? And I said, I just feel like God's putting on my heart to build something that can connect ethnic Romanian youth. I'll never forget when I launched the feature of having your own photo album where you upload a photo and you can comment on that photo. I'm telling you, Dan, like it like blew up. This individual was so focused on, beating Apple that facing him was a photo of Steve Jobs. When faith is at the core of your principles of how you do business, of how you do, if how you show up every single day, not only will you be noticed, but people admire and promote. I always had a mindset of, I want to establish a ministry and identify others to be able to help build them up to continue. And so I always applied the approach in corporate professional of, building and leading teams to, ministry from a standpoint of discipleship, mentorship. And so always wove that in.
I don't know if you remember, but when Charity Cup started,
Of
I
course, yeah.
believe you're one of the first donors.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know if you remember this.
No, I don't.
Definitely.
I don't. It's like, man, the Dans beat me to it, man. This is so cool.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dan Bora. I'm your host of Making Your Life Count, a podcast produced by Charity Cup. I'm really excited to bring you another episode today. Before I introduce my guest, I wanted to just remind you what the podcast is about. And as Charity Cup, we believe that there's only two things that are worth investing in, and that's God and people. And you can make your life count by investing in those two things, God and people. By people, we mean the souls of people. So we try to interview different guests that have embodied this and have kind of shown this throughout their life, are passionate about maybe what they're doing, but also passionate about the kingdom of God, which is eternal. So that's what these stories are about. And today I have another special guest that embodies this very well. And what I like about this guest is that he's sort of maybe not the typical guest that you would think would be on the podcast. A lot of people think the people that want to make their life count is a typical, let's say, a missionary or a pastor. Well, at Charity Cup, we actually believe that there's a lot of people that are just pursuing their passions, but living it out with kingdom purpose. So my friend today does that very well. So please help me introduce a gentleman that I've known for quite a long time. I guess you could say in some ways we've grown up together. We actually went to high school together and so on and so forth. And he became a very well-known individual around the Romanian community, and not only in the professional community. He's worked for many companies, including Samsung. He'll tell us more about that. He's led many, formations of worship teams, different nonprofit organizations he was involved in, and really has been an entrepreneur at heart. But more than that, has always kept the ministry at heart as well. And that's what we love. So without any further ado, please help me welcome Cosmin Ghiurau to the podcast.
Hey, Dan, how are you? Good to be here, and thanks so much for the invitation.
My pleasure, and thank you for accepting the invitation. And like I said, I really meant that when we started this journey, you were definitely one of the first people that came up in my mind as somebody I wanted to talk to, because I think it embodies this making your life count. And that's what we want to talk about. So first and foremost, we want to talk about some of the accomplishments that you've had in your life and kind of where God has led you and the doors He's opened. They're pretty big. And then maybe what led you to also kind of keep the passion for ministry, because a lot of people, they get to certain success in their life and they forget about God, and those things don't go in parallel. And you've kept those things in parallel, as far as I know, and so that's what we want to find out about. So thank you for joining us. So Cosmin, I guess we'll let the audience in. We've known each other for quite a while, like I mentioned in the introduction, including from high school. I remember we would go to lunch, and Cosmin, and I guess so did I a little bit. We were drawing cars in our lunch break. I don't know if you remember that, but
That's right.
instead of going and like other people would go have lunch and kind of waste our lunch, we would do our homework and do other things.
We were always dreaming and creating and thinking about the future, right?
Exactly. So when you ended up going sort of to the Institute of Art in Detroit, right? I believe, what was the school called again?
Yeah, so it's called College for Creative Studies in the Metro Detroit. Actually, it was in downtown Detroit, Michigan.
Yep. It did not surprise me at all. Like I said, I thought you always had a very creative background, and I remember we were involved in even shooting some videos back in the day, probably some projects for school. But those are the early stages. Since then, obviously, we've all kind of moved and kind of pursued our own careers, if you would. You've kind of been in and out of sort of the charity cup world. There was a time when you were very intimate with sort of the charity cup
Mhm.
world when you lived in Detroit. I remember we were meeting at Panera Bread in the morning, if you remember that, for
That's
maybe, I
right.
don't know,
Yeah,
years maybe, right?
yeah, yeah.
As I was thinking about this podcast that came to mind, I'm like, oh my goodness. Yeah. So quite a lot of history there. And you have moved to San Antonio since. So maybe you can give us a brief synopsis of maybe some of the things that you consider are like your major accomplishments. I don't want to dive deep into them yet because I want to jump a little bit further, like basically how you got to that point, and then later on in the podcast we'll kind of dive deeper into those passions.
Yeah, for sure. So thank you for that long, unabridged resume, I guess. But before we kind of dive in there, I just want to share that I love how Charity Cup has always been around making your life count because that was always an identity of mine that I think from a young age. I didn't know it at the time, but as I've matured and as I've grown up, for lack of a better word, that was always a pursuit of mine of, what can I do to not just make my life count, but also, do something for the kingdom. But yeah, so before I kind of dive into a little bit about the accomplishments, just want to share with your audience, for those maybe that for the first time seeing me, uh, like you said, I'm not a fantastic national soccer player or a lot of the great people that you have had on the podcast and whatnot, but like many similar stories of those that were born in Romania and immigrated here at a young age. My father fled communist Romania when I was 3 years old and left my mom. Myself, I'm the oldest boy. And when he left later, I guess a few months later, he found out that my mom was pregnant with the second boy. And so fast forward a year and a half, we immigrated to the US in the early 80s. And so, pretty much was raised in America. I came at the U.S., like I said, at 5 years old, and since then we had two more brothers here in the U.S., so we're a total of four brothers. And just growing up in the 80s, right, the ethnic Romanian community was smaller, I think, compared to where we are today, and as Romanians, our identity was the identity of, we'll say, communism, fleeing communism. So a lot of hard work, a lot of grit, a lot of, just making anything in life count. And so I think we all, those that are perhaps our age, can relate to that. And I think, those that are younger more than likely heard their parents or their, grandparents at this stage of going through that. And so growing up in the 80s, being the oldest, I always was tapped on the shoulder to really be that individual within the family because, of course, I knew English to help with my parents, with my family and everything else. And so there was always that burden, I guess you would call it, on my shoulders of just not depending on others, but being very self-sufficient in everything that I do and just thinking differently. Of course, nothing was given, everything was earned. And so, the 90s, that's when we met. in high school, and I remember being in high school, I was always the only Romanian in school, right? And then when this guy with the last name of Bora came around, I'm like, man, is this guy Romanian? Let me go meet him. And I think there was another girl in our high school, maybe two. So there's a total of like 4 or 5 of us, right? And so of course naturally we just connected, and we shared the same heritage and cultural background, and so we just clicked. But I always thought about, what can I do that's different than the norm? And I think that's a thread that throughout where God has placed me, not only in career, but also ministry, has been a common theme of how to do things differently. And so I'll never forget senior in high school. Like you said, I love drawing. I was always very creative. My father, like I said, fled communist Romania. He was a tailor, simple job. My mom cleaned homes. And so, of course, like many parents, they had ambitions for their children to succeed, to do better than them, right? So be a doctor, be a lawyer, be an engineer, etc. And so I'll never forget, I went into their bedroom senior year. I was what, maybe 17 or so. And I said, Mom, Dad, they're in the bed, getting ready to go to sleep, and I go in because I had a great communication and relationship with them. I said, I want to go to art school. And so you can imagine
Whatever Romanian parent wanted to hear.
Romanian parents that, my dad literally fled, ran away from bullets, spent time in prison. Like, are you kidding me? And so at the time, as ignorant as I was as a teenager, I said, Mom, Dad, I know you sacrificed a lot, you've worked hard, but I believe that if I love doing what I do, I will be successful. I will financially make you proud, and so on and so forth, right? And, I think that idea really stuck to me. And so, it was very different. Like I said, went to art school. I wanted to become a car designer, and living in the Metro Detroit area, that was such a different job than most people, right? You grew up in Metro Detroit area, a lot of design engineers and, things like that. And I would always have to explain, like, no, I'm not the engineer. I'm the one that draws for the engineer. So it was just such a different thing. But, in 1998, I met my wife, Claudia, and we got married in 1999, and graduated college in 98 with a bachelor's, and just said, hey, okay, God, what is next? And that led to my first role at General Motors. So I actually worked in what's called the styling studios, where you're working on those vehicles that are 5 years in the future. So again, kind of going back to the, always thinking about the future, always thinking about what's next. God was putting me in those.
Your dream.
Yeah,
it wasn't just a dream that
for
happened.
sure. Yeah, for sure. I was working on these vehicles, right, where you had to have special security clearance to see the vehicles that were coming up, and they were camouflaged, so press couldn't see them and things like that. And so it was just really, really fun. But during that time, I was very entrepreneurial in the sense of saying, you know what, I love having this job, but there's this new thing that's starting to become interesting, and that's called the internet, web, etc. And so I rolled up my sleeves and just self-taught myself web design, and again, rooted in creative. And so to me, I'll never forget my last year of college. There was the top students, they were putting their portfolio of designs and drawings on a web page. I'm like, how in the world are they doing this? So I self-taught myself how to do a web page and so on. And that led to going up to, our pastor in our church and saying, hey, you know what? As a church, we should have a web page. And so that led to me kind of purchasing a domain for our website. And this is what, late?
This I didn't know, guys.
Yeah, late 90s. And so I purchased a domain, created a web page, had to, again, like learn and teach our pastor and leadership of what it meant to do that. And that led to other, obviously now back then, if you had a business, you needed to do a business card, right? Now Cosmin can do this thing called web pages, right? And so all the small business owners were reaching out to me of saying, hey, can you build me a website? Can you build me a website? And it led to me launching my own web design business and actually leaving the dream job at GM. And so I worked at GM for about 5 years and pursued a digital web marketing company for about 3 or 4 years. And at that time, a lot of people were doing web development work with India or more east. And I had a friend from Romania that would come and go during the summers, and he approached me and said, "Hey, look, why don't we partner and do something where I do a lot of development, kind of hire people in Romania." And sure enough, we partnered and we did what we called a nearshore strategy for web design and kind of development. And so that's what actually led to, if you remember, our company did the first charitycup.com.
Building it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked very
I
closely.
didn't realize that, but I think Herdian was handling a lot of that.
Yeah,
You're
yeah,
right.
and he reached out to me and said, "Hey, can you help us with kind of the few back end things, this and that." And so, early on was with charitycup.com, and kind of
Wow.
led to other marketing initiatives. And so, our paths have definitely intersected a lot over the years. But I want to kind of fast forward. Of course, I mentioned I got married in 1999 to Claudia, and then in 2001 we had our daughter Emma. And so there's a point where I like to say in the 2000s, I made a lot of mistakes. I took a lot of risks, and mistakes from a business standpoint, from a we'll call it risk perspective, right? And I would tell myself like, hey, if I screw something up, I still have time, right, to like make it better. And I think for those of you that are listening, maybe that are younger, use that time in your teens, 20s to really see what God is calling you to, in not only professional but also ministry, and just be receptive to the whisper of God, and obviously seeking in His Word and prayer, because that's really what guided me during my 20s, not only in professional but also ministry. Like I said, I did the first website for our church, and then it also led to this idea that I loved singing ever since I was a little kid. My mom was actually a soloist in the choir, and so I was always around singing. And a buddy of mine from church, we kind of said, hey, you know what? Why don't we create a group and sing songs and lead the church with this group? And before we didn't even realize that was what now is kind of considered a worship team, right?
Worship team, right?
Yeah, exactly. And this was like early on in the late 90s, early 2000s, where the worship movement, for lack of a better word, was really beginning to take hold, Hillsong, Vineyard, things like that. And so being somebody that's a constant learner, I really absorb myself, like, what are they doing? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it? And then how does that apply to our ethnic Romanian churches? And so, was given the privilege to be able to eventually not only lead the youth worship ministry, but eventually like the worship ministry there in Michigan at the local church that I was serving, which led to actually being ordained as a minister, leading worship, the worship department. And so I was kind of in this, at one point, this space where, my professional career, I was, building a business, before working in corporate America, and then also having this ministry that was trying to build, and I wasn't really, I'll say, a classic worship minister or leader, because I didn't have the music training, but I had a heart to disciple, mentor, and build other worshipers, and really like build a worship ministry. I always said, like, when somebody would call us a worship group, I would say, please don't call us a worship group. This is a worship ministry, because we're building and we're serving the Lord more than serving on stage for the church. And so just had that bigger aperture of understanding what worship ministry is. And I'm sure there's others that you may have already spoken to about this aspect, or I'm sure in the future you will talk about it. But I could speak a lot about worship ministry, but it's kind of in between these two places. And so, it was a pursuit of, God, like what is next, not only professionally, but also in ministry. And, that was all through the 2000s, I'll say, from like, 98 to 2008, 2009. And in between there, I actually, in 2007, and I'll kind of end this question with this. In 2007, I actually exited that web design company that I had and decided to go to a startup. We'll call it a digital agency startup, where I just said, I want to try something different because now I have a creative background, business background, tech background. How do I kind of converge this together in this digital agency? I really liked what the president and CEO and everything were thinking about the vision. And so I was like their third employee. And I remember, just kind of doing some projects and eventually researching and realized like, man, there's this thing called social networking that is starting to pop up. And based on the experience of another project that I had going on in the 2000s that connected ethnic Romanian youth, I said to myself, you know what? This social media thing may be a thing. And this is in 2007, but not just personally, but how does it impact businesses? And so I was basically pitched our CEO of saying, hey, I want this to be a part of our product service offering for the agency, let me help build it. And sure enough, I was kind of the spokesperson or evangelist for that for the agency. And it was really successful to help. We were able to bring on board some pretty key clients that really helped the agency along. So anyways, I'm gonna pause there because I kind of referenced something about connecting ethnic Romanian youth.
So I wanted to ask you, so if we were to kind of fast forwarding to the present moment for just a second, this is what I read and what I know. Currently, right now, you are also an entrepreneur. You're leading a business. I believe it's a fractional CEO. You can tell us about it. What is it? Maybe what is that
Yeah.
called?
So
Just tell us a brief moment because I will come back to it. But what?
yeah, about 3-4 years ago, I left corporate America at the time and decided to not be a consultant, but be a fractional executive leader for small to medium-sized businesses.
Okay. Are you able to mention what the company's
Yeah,
called?
of course. So I launched what's called FractionalOfficer.com.
Okay, very cool. So you're an entrepreneur. I knew that. At the same time, I believe you were involved in your church or was involved in the worship leading. So that sounds
Yeah.
like that continued, and that's what you're currently doing. You're also involved in a podcast production, which is awesome because I saw it and a lot of groundbreaking things. I know you as working in some of the top companies in the US, like Samsung, multi-international. Now, I may know very little about what your role was, but I just want to fast forward and kind of give the audience a preview. I believe you worked at RadioShack for a while, which is also a huge company. Um,
Was.
was a huge company, right? And then there was, is there, I believe, an insurance company, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So those are all huge companies, huge roles, as I know it. And then all along with that, you've never lost your passion for ministry, and I think that's what's really awesome. So that's kind of where we're going to get to, and we'll talk about those roles in a moment. But going back to sort of where we're at in the 2000s, because I wanted to understand. So where did RoYouth come in? At what point in this timeline? So RoYouth, for some of you that don't know, before Facebook existed and MySpace, there was RoYouth. Okay, trust me, it was a big thing. And I remember I was part of it. I mean, it was part in the sense I was participating. My friend Cosmin started this thing, and it was very happening. But I don't know exactly at what point we're at.
Yeah. So the 2000s, like I mentioned. So actually, in 2002, when I was part of leading of the youth worship and some other things. Our church in Michigan was selected to host, I think it was the 2003 East Coast Youth Convention. And so just, having, again, like that tech, design, creative, managerial kind of background was coordinating and helping coordinate that convention. But I was building sites, I was building things that are starting to become more interactive. I was getting involved in like setting up web forums and things like that. And so I'll never forget. I went at. My soundboard, of course, is my wife, and so she really holds me accountable with all my ideas. I'm like, "What do you think?" And she's like, "No." I'm like, "Are you sure?" So, I said to her, I'm like, "What do you think?" RoYouth. And she's like, "Has a good ring to it. What is it?" And I said, "I just feel like God's putting on my heart to build something that can connect ethnic Romanian youth from the whole world." And that's what was the genesis of the idea. And so I set up an online web forum. And for those of you that don't experience web forums, right, it's an opportunity to kind of post a topic, have somebody reply, get somebody else, you're engaged in a conversation back and forth. And for that time, that was social media before social media, right? And so knowing that we had this East Coast convention coming up, I said it was going to be a perfect opportunity to market it, to be able to have the previous youth from the previous location or other areas that are going to come to this convention conference, connect with us and understand what's happening. And so that's what kind of kicked it off. I went on a road show, went to churches in Chicago and obviously in Metro Detroit area and other places, and just did a road show. Hey, we're having a convention and connect on RoYouth. And it really took on a life of its own, because in 2003, when I launched it, by 2005 or 2006, at one point we had over 1,000 concurrent people online at once. So it was, and again, now with like millions and billions, right, on social media, it's nothing compared to now, but then that was a massive big deal. And I remember getting calls at like 1 a.m. in the morning from pastors on the West Coast, and I was in Metro Detroit, being like, "Hey, so-and-so's parents just called me and said that you need to take this down off of the website because it's embarrassing." That, like, it was no rules of engagement, right? It was just wacky. But what it did was it helped me understand what now is referred to as online community management, and social networks, social behaviors, understanding how individuals engage and interact. And I'll never forget when I launched the feature of having your own photo album where you upload a photo and you can comment on that photo. I'm telling you, Dan, like it like blew up, because everybody wants to see themselves and everybody has an opinion about others, right? And again, like in thinking now in hindsight, it's like now it's such second nature to us, but back then that was really revolutionary. And this is before MySpace, before Facebook, and so basically you had your own profile with your own comments and posts and things that you were engaging in the forum, and also your photo albums and your photo collection and so on, and a few other features. And so I was constantly tinkering on social networking behaviors, and what will engage, what will drive, where do people click. Like, I was doing all of this behind the scenes, for lack of a word, tools to help people engage. And fast forward now with the billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of people that work on these social networks, they do that 1,000x of what I was doing, and a few other small kind of things we're doing back in the day. Yeah, it grew. I'll just end with this. I mean, it grew to eventually, within 5 years, it grew to about 30,000 total users on RoYouth. And we had spin-offs of a RoYouth in Canada, a RoYouth in Australia, a RoYouth in Austria, and a RoYouth in Romania.
Wow. So those aspects I didn't know about the spinoff, but what I wanted to say, I didn't know exactly where this timeline fit within like MySpace and whatever came later, but this is
Yeah,
definitely very
pre
forward
MySpace,
thinking. Sorry?
pre MySpace. Yeah,
Pre-MySpace. So technically it's, I mean, essentially, yeah, before any of this, you were very much forward thinking before any of this kind of took
yeah, and
flight.
actually with MySpace gaining popularity, it's what led to less engagement on RoYouth because now, that we weren't within our own Romanian bubble, ethnic Romanian bubble. We were, it was everybody, right? And there were some other features that MySpace introduced where you can kind of like, custom design your backgrounds, your profiles, put all kinds of funny GIFs and graphics and blah, blah, blah. And MySpace was more centered around music and things like that. And then eventually Facebook. And so, gradually started seeing a decline in engagement and users. I think by 2007, 2008, there was only a handful that returned.
Yeah. But the idea is that you were forward thinking and pioneering something that nobody's thought about at that point. I
Mhm.
wanted to also mention that I think this Row Youth also had a sort of a spiritual side of it, if I remember correctly, because people, first of all, you were doing the service of connecting youth from around the country that wanted to know each other because obviously everybody's interested to, get married eventually. I felt some of that served this purpose. I
Yeah,
know
yeah.
people might be laughing about it, but it wasn't important thinking back then. It was nice to see people from Romania and from other countries which you would never have a chance to meet. But this way you did. And not only that, but there was a lot of faith-based items that were being shared besides
It,
sort of the
it,
the
it
social.
was, and the roots of it obviously being started with the aspect of a Christian convention conference. Our tagline was connecting ethnic Romanian Christian youth. And so there was a Christian worldview to the content that was there, or at least that was always my goal and intent. We had very strict rules, guidelines, policies, what you can and can't do, and developed moderators that because I couldn't be there 24/7, right?
Yeah.
So I developed volunteer moderators that would, you could flag pieces of content and things like that, and you could take them down, and so we tried to, we try to keep it as clean as possible. And of course, you're always going to have things slip through the cracks, but we would do our best to keep things clean based on certain principles and guidelines that we have for the community. Again, community management type of things. If you're in a secular world, right? Like there's community guidelines that you have to adhere to, and even today, right? If you go to social network, there's community guidelines that you have to adhere to. So we filtered through that, but yes, it also spun off into the Row Youth, we'll call it, vision spun off into, can we do some, now that we have all these people in the digital virtual world, let's bring them together. So, I had, of course, a group of close advisors and, folks that I leaned on to help guide the direction. And, we wanted to launch, a Row Youth leadership network where, we would meet, kind of have what's now many people have like leadership summits, things like that. We spun off into sports. We love what Charity Cup was doing with soccer,
Was that
but
okay? So this was after, because
yeah,
you
yeah,
bring that
yeah,
up.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, really, when it started hitting its peak of users, like I said, in about 2004, 2005, that's when we said, okay, how do we get this offline? And so you guys are doing great with soccer, and I think you guys started doing volleyball, and we're like, myself, I love playing basketball again,
Yep.
growing up in America. So like
Right.
we spun off and did three versus three, street ball style basketball tournaments, and that's where I think we collaborated a little bit with Charity
Yep.
Cup as well, and that actually grew. We had tournaments in Metro Detroit, Chicago, Arizona. I think we even had one in
Phoenix.
Cali because I actually appointed my brother who played a lot of basketball in high school and some junior college to kind of oversee that. But it grew some legs, if you will, and that was obviously a charitable initiative where you bought in, and then proceeds would go to a nonprofit and a cause, and so. we had the sports, and then the vision was going to get as big as purchasing a campground to do a RoYouth camp back then, and actually even now in Romania you had Peniel, right?
Mm,
And so we're
yeah.
like, man, nothing like that exists in the U.S. for young people, and obviously we have the young people digitally. How do we influence them offline? And so we actually went and saw some property, and we were considering fundraising and this or that, but we just I decided at one point it's like, let's stick and focus to the digital and make sure that we get that right. And so other than the basketball side, and I think we got together for a leadership meeting a couple times, but other than that we kind of kept it there. But
But
yeah, it was all through the lens of how do we grow as a Christian um, influence and impact as young people in America.
well, and that's exactly what I had to mention, that in sort of in this sort of newfound success, because essentially it was a success, and I don't know, you're probably considering how do I monetize it, and you could have gone to some crazy numbers probably if you're projecting
Hmm.
it out. Yet, I feel like your heart was still about how do I sort of monetize this for Christ.
Yeah, yeah,
You're talking about a camp, you're talking about a charity tournament when you could have been thinking, okay, how do I talk to the next investor to, sort of take this out of the Christian community? Yet your focus wasn't that, and I think
yeah.
that's
It
how I know
always,
you and your heart from the very beginning.
yeah, it always was. And I know, in the journey of when RoYouth was really scaling and growing in users, I've had various people, reach out to say, are you monetizing? And in all honesty, like it was all funded by me. I really built it in a very lean financial perspective, and other than a couple of small donors, there was everything was I didn't take a penny for myself, right? And so at one point I met at a conference with a young person. They're like, hey, I'm a huge fan of RoYouth, and you kind of mentioned that a lot of young people would meet each other, guy girls, and they're like, you should really spin off and do a rodate.com or something. And I'm like, absolutely not. I am not getting involved in that.
Was that Ruben Lupulescu by any chance?
No, no, no. I'm
That
like,
is fun.
absolutely not. I am not getting involved in that. There's enough drama in our communities. I don't need more drama online.
Yeah, I remember, but so that's what I now sort of looking at the overview of that, because I didn't know the ins and outs. I think at that point we were not sort of keeping in touch as closely as maybe we did it years before. But I could totally see where you could have taken your eyes off the ball, if you would, from a Christian standpoint, and say, hey, I don't know, I want to pursue totally something else. This tech is amazing, but somehow your heart was still in the right place, and
Yeah.
I think that's to be appreciated, cause and I think that will prove itself out later on in some of the other positions that you had. I believe you were probably at this time, were you still leading worship at your church? Because I know
Yeah.
that was quite
Yeah.
a long time you were doing that.
Yeah, of course. At one point, and this is where I would caution anybody that's listening and has a heart to serve, yet still feeling the pressure to succeed, obviously, like from a life financial aspect. Be careful to not burn out, and be very wise in selecting what you pursue, to really pursue that which one you know you believe that God is calling you to do, uh,
Hmm.
and don't overextend yourself, because I'll be real for a moment. I was involved at one point with having a web design business, working a full-time job at GM, running RoYouth, being active in ministry, worship team, youth ministry, things like that. And more importantly, I was a husband and a father. And so I would say I have like 7 full-time jobs. And so being in your 20s, you know, 3 hours of sleep, let's do it. But it quickly catches up. And so over the years, I've learned to just, seek God's face more and say, Lord, like, where do you really want me to be most effective? And, what you've put in me from a from a professional aspect and a ministry aspect, how do those weave together to be able to serve you more efficiently? Um, because ultimately that's what really counts. Otherwise, you risk burnout and you risk being ineffective. And so that's kind of where I was.
Hmm. Very, very, very interesting. So sort of as the RoYouth chapter was winding down, what happened after that? This
Yeah.
is what, around 2004,
Yeah,
2000?
yeah. And earlier I mentioned towards the end of 2000s, I joined like kind of a startup, and so I left my kind of web design digital company. RoYouth was tapering down. There wasn't the engagement, and so started the skills that were I built during that time.
Yeah,
Basically managing a social network
yeah,
without it being known as a social network, gave me the skills to kind of pursue social media marketing. And this was in like
nice.
the late 2000s. And so I was doing it for the agency, and big companies were beginning to see the value of bringing that what's called in-house, or in other words, like hire people inside the company to
Yeah,
run their social media accounts. And that's where Samsung came into play, where we were living in the Metro Detroit area. And I'm like, man, I would be really awesome to break into a corporate role. And I applied, and by God's grace was hired. Was flown down there to the Metro, the Dallas Fort Worth area, and they interviewed me for about 8 hours, about, I don't know, 8 or 9 people. And after the interview, like, they're like, hey, when can you start next week? I'm like, I live in Michigan, like, I got to relocate. But basically I was hired to really start and run Samsung Mobile, so like the phone division, their social media marketing. And I remember, I'll never forget, like, if you're in marketing and advertising, you deal with budgets, with advertising, things like that. And the CMO of the company, because they didn't know where to put me, so I like reported to the chief marketing officer of the company, and I was just like, a manager role, because they didn't know like where to put me. And so he came up to me, tapped me on the shoulder, I don't know, the first or second week, and he's like, hey, so how much budget do you need to advertise and do what you do in this social media thing? Like, he had no clue. He was like 60 years old or something. And I'm like, give me a minute. And I gave him like a six-figure number, and he's like, you got it. I'm like, okay. And so, from there, I kind of worked with not only in the US, but also out of Korea, where they're headquartered. Had an opportunity to go out there and kind of really, develop and grow what was called the social media practice. Began what's now called influencer marketing, where I literally reached out to folks that were following me on social media, that were in the press, bloggers, things like that, saying, hey, we got this new device coming out. Would you want to test it? And I would literally put it in an envelope and ship it to them, because we had no agencies or companies doing that back in the day. And so really establishing that, had an opportunity. The company started doing really well, and was one of the first to work very closely with our TV advertising. We actually did a Super Bowl commercial where
wow, you were
yeah.
part of.
Yeah. So we kind of pitched, kind of the marketing leadership pitched an idea of do like a Super Bowl commercial, and keep, for those that are not in the space, when you buy, and this is public knowledge, if you go to ChatGPT or anything, a typical 30-second spot is, easily $2 to $5 million, right? Just to advertise for 30 seconds, not even counting the production of the TV commercial, the, hiring the director, the talent, everything else, right? And so we did that. And I said, hey, you know what? If we're doing the Super Bowl commercial, we have a social presence at the end of our spot. Why don't we put our Facebook URL or a way to link to our social to get people to connect and engage after the 30 seconds, so we don't so we get a return on investment beyond that. And so being able to work closely with our marketing leadership had that opportunity, and so was one of the first kind of brands that did basically what's called a call to action on a Super Bowl commercial, to digital, to social, online.
So that was your
Yeah,
contribution.
yeah. To me, it made it's like a no-brainer, right? Like if we're going to put a 30-second spot, spend $5 million, why wouldn't you want people to go online and not just view your website or fill out a form, but comment what they thought about the commercial and your product,
Yeah,
right? So it's like,
absolutely. Cosmin, before I wanna dive deeper a little bit into this chapter because I'm actually first of all very curious on some things, but I wanted to just go back a little bit before pre-Samsung.
mhm.
You said so during this time you were at sort of a startup. I didn't know exactly what startup it was, but I remember at one point, I believe we invited you to host. We were hosting some entrepreneur meetings at our coffee shop in the morning, and
Yeah.
you had come in as a guest. And I remember you at that point, social media was very
Yeah, so we
unknown.
did. Just to quickly put a bow on that, being involved at that agency startup that I was a part of, was responsible for social. Like, I basically started what was called a social media breakfast chapter in Michigan, and so basically those that were in the social media space at the time, right, from less companies, more agencies, and like practitioners, we just basically huddle together for breakfast and partner with a local small business and network, right? Hey, what's working, what's not, what are we doing, what can we do better, things like that. And so it's basically a meetup, and we just called it social media breakfast. And so there was multiple chapters throughout the US at the time. I think it was started by somebody I knew out of Boston, and I just started the one in the Metro Detroit area.
But so I remember inviting you, and I believe you even spoke during that time because essentially it was like a hub where you could meet other business
Yep.
people, and kind of every time there was somebody speaking and like kind of training them on certain aspects. So then
Yep.
social media at the time was like this animal that nobody understood. And then here you are, I invited you, you came, and I remember, besides what you talked there, I remember talking to you about it, and you're telling me, watch, Dan, this is what's coming down the line. And even throughout the years, you're always telling me, look, at the next phase is, video. I remember you were telling me video is going to be the next big thing. And I paid attention because we did start our social media page back in the day when it was only allowed to have, like, there was no Facebook business pages. It was all personal. But I
That's right.
believe after talking to you, we started even that, and we actually maxed it out as far as the number of friends.
Yeah.
And it was kind of in sort of the phase when you had come into our meeting and kind of told us this is where the industry is
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, well, just being early on in that movement, there was, I actually had contacts within the platforms themselves. So within Facebook, within YouTube, Twitter was up and coming. I think they were founded in 2007. So I had contacts because they were small too, right? And so they were trying to bring in people to, help them, teach them the platform, especially businesses, right? And if you were, like, for example, when I started at Samsung, right, they saw dollars because we were a major brand. So they went, they went through a lot of hoops to, get us on the forefront of all their research. They would share research with us, like, here's what we see coming. Here's the product. Here's, the next 6 months, this is what our platform's going to do, things like that, right? And so it allowed us as a company to prepare strategically in order to, be there and be first. And so I would always push the platforms to do that as well, to be like, hey, if we're spending X amount of dollars in advertising with you guys, I need to know.
Yeah.
right? And so
Wow.
it gave us us as far as like the team that I led at the time and myself, insight into a lot of what they were doing.
But let me ask you this, which is, I want to know what happened the moment you sort of got a request, or I don't know, an email, text from Samsung. Like, was it a big moment, or was it like, no?
It was 100% God. It was imposter syndrome before imposter syndrome was a thing. Like I went to that interview and I told my wife, I'm like, if I know nobody in Texas, I know nobody at Samsung, and like if I get this job, it's literally a miracle. And sure enough, like, as from the first interview, I hit it off with everybody and just, I like I am in real life. I just here's my perspective and it's always through the lens of making you better. And so I just brought that to the table and they're like, "Hey, we need somebody with the chops to understand what this is, but also a strategic leadership mindset to be able to help drive and lead it." And so it gave me the opportunity. Yeah. But yeah, when I got the call back, like I was like, Lord, this is only you, because it was actually the third job offer from Texas that I got within a span of 6 months or so. And the first two, we just put it before the Lord and just prayed about it. And as a family, we just did not. Something didn't settle right with us in that moment. And then when this offer came, me, my wife, and daughter were like, now's the time. And sure enough, because obviously it's more than a job, right? You're relocating, family, new life, no family, have to build new friendships, community, things like that. So it's more than just a job.
But this, like I said, to me, this was the equivalent, sort of playing basketball in sort of the minor leagues, and all of a sudden
Yeah.
the pros call.
Yeah.
That's, I mean,
Yeah.
that's
It
how I
was,
would view
it
it from the
was,
outside.
yeah. Yeah. It was definitely huge. And, um, from the outside, it was like that. And the reality on the inside, yes, it was a large conglomerate, um, but they were just beginning to enter the American market, even though Samsung Mobile itself. So you keep in mind the timeline. I know now our iPhones are everything, or Android devices, etc. But then it's like Samsung had the largest market share of mobile devices, so they sold the most, but directly to the carrier, so directly to like AT&T. I mean, back now there's a whole bunch of other carriers, Verizon, and there's a few other ones that don't
Yeah.
exist now, but they didn't have a brand recognition. Nobody knew it was a Samsung. And keep in mind, again, 2010, the iPhone came out in 2007, the first one, right? And so I joined, and they created the position because they wanted to launch and enter the market in the US with a glass phone, right? So they called it at the time the Galaxy. So I was part of the marketing team that launched the first Galaxy phone. And I don't know, what are they now? Galaxy 50? I don't know what they're at, because I don't
Same
follow
here.
all the Galaxy phones,
Yeah.
but I'm exaggerating. But the point is, like, yeah, they wanted to not only um, enter the US market, but they wanted to dominate Apple, which was extremely. They were they're the big elephant at that time when it came to brand recognition, and everybody was going to iPhone.
Now, not only did you sort of get to work for this huge company, but I wanted to ask you, it sounded to me like you're pretty much called up to the C-suite or close to it, which
Yeah.
that in itself is a huge accomplishment. Again, and even just peeking behind that curtain at a huge company, if you can share some of that, because sounds like they saw a lot of value in you as they were coming to the U.S. If they were going to bring you on and sort of risk on an individual, and they found you, that's the guy that's worth the risking on. So you
Yeah, no,
obviously,
God opened up such incredible doors. And I think, in today's generation, I think is less about titles and more about what you do. And so, and that's at the time, because social media marketing, Samsung leadership marketing leadership and executive leadership didn't really know where it fit or how to monetize it or how to show value from it. And so there was a lot of uncharted territory that just doing research and experience and strategic thinking, basically pitching and presenting to them along the way, learning. And I think many of us during that time that were in that industry and in the tech world, we were uncharted territory, right? Like we knew this was going to be a thing, right? But we needed to build it. And so because of that, God opened up that door to be able to be at the table with the president of Samsung of mobile in the US, right? And I love sharing the story of being called into his office with a few others in kind of preparation for the launch of one of our devices. And you can imagine it's your typical kind of corporate boardroom, like because South Koreans, they're that's a whole other podcast episode. I love Korean culture. But they're very hierarchical and a lot about honor, respect, and things like that. And we were just like in the movies, right? Like wood panel walls, like all that stuff, right? And then, he's at the head of the table, the VP is at the other end of the table, and then, all the others are on the sides, right? And as he's kind of talking, like, we shall beat iPhone, we shall beat Apple, and like doing all that. There was a small little like 4x6 frame in front of him, like to the left, right? Like on a table. Like he doesn't have a binder, he doesn't have anything. He just had this like 4x6 frame in front of him, like standing, right? And I'm like, man, after this meeting, I'm like, I gotta see, is it his family? Is it his children? Is it his home in Korea? Like, what's over there? And after the meeting, kind of share some things, and we wrap up the meeting. I like go around him and look at the frame, and sure enough, the frame facing him was a photo of Steve Jobs. So this individual was so focused on beating Apple that he literally would look him in the eye every single day in every single decision that he would make. And so that's how driven they were. And sure enough, right, like Samsung exploded in the early 2010s. So it was a lot of many of those opportunities that was very privileged that I really don't see myself worthy, but God opened up those doors and experiences to also share, and I love sharing these stories, not only here on, podcasts like this, but, to others and young people and those that are, up and coming, if you will, that they're like, man, how do I juggle career, life, faith, family, all of that. And so, I love sharing these stories that it is possible, to live your faith, in the corporate workplace and to be a light and an example, and God will bless you and you'll be successful.
So during this time when I know South Koreans, a lot of them are Christian, right? Was that the culture a little bit at Samsung or not really?
Not really. Many were, but when it came to business, it was business.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Did you have a chance to go to Korea during that time?
Yeah. I mean, I had an opportunity to kind of lay down the groundwork for the social media practice and strategy, and we actually called it social business at one point. It was actually a term that I didn't coin it, but there was others that we were talking about of like, hey, how does social become a beyond marketing, beyond advertising part of an organization, right? Because in HR and recruitment, right? There's a lot of ways to recruit people from a social perspective, and and product research, and there's so many different ways that you can integrate social and social intelligence. They actually tapped me on the shoulder to. They did a global summit in Seoul in Korea and over there in Samsung's global headquarters on basically training and equipping other divisions throughout the world on social media best practices. And so I had an opportunity to basically share, what we did, how we do it, and how it can be duplicated within every various stages of the world.
So this is was this a C-suite role at this point, or did it get to that
Yeah,
point?
so it was more of it wasn't an executive role because there's other higher. I was only there for what, about 3 years or so. So they're very hierarchical, right? There's
Hierarchical.
other, yeah, but what I appreciated was it was less about the title and more about accountability and ownership and all. They began to start working like a tech company, and if anybody that works at a tech company, it's less about your title and more about your ownership and what you do.
But you pretty much, in my mind, reached the pinnacle of, let's say, from a corporate standpoint, how far, somebody could get.
Yeah, yeah.
Samsung, GM, but Samsung at that point, I remember it was growing, and right now, to this day, they don't only have phones; they have the best TVs, the best
Yeah,
refrigerators.
absolutely. Yeah, and they're a global conglomerate, and as a matter of fact, Samsung's, I'm not sh I haven't checked recently, but at one point, their construction business was the largest business in the overall portfolio. They've built, I won't quote the exact buildings, but they've built most of Dubai.
Really?
Yeah,
I I didn't even know about
yeah,
that.
yeah.
That's interesting. So I'm curious during this sort of, kind of reaching maybe the point that you had hoped in some ways. How did you balance sort of the family or the faith aspect? Because you
Yeah,
could easily
absolutely.
say, I don't know, I don't need God anymore, or, I kind of needed to be involved up to this point, but now we're good.
Yeah.
How did you keep that in balance?
So that was at the epicenter of everything, honestly. And I like to say, during the week you had your corporate professional life, and on weekends, and if there was rehearsals or something during the week, like, I always tried to maintain that. And during this time, I continued to be active in worship ministry. At this point, I had developed other worship leaders, and when I moved over to Dallas, served at a small church for a couple of years there, and helped develop their worship ministry. And so, I always had a mindset of, I want to establish a ministry and identify others to be able to help build them up to continue. And so I always applied the approach in corporate professional of building and leading teams to ministry from a standpoint of discipleship, mentorship. And so always wove that in. And also in business, in corporate, set myself aside, right? There's when you're in corporate America and business, if you will, that the 9 to 5 is only a part of that job, right? You have the after hours, you have the conferences, you have the traveling, you have this where, um, you know, I was I established myself as that designated driver for the crew. Like, if you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah,
Like,
I do.
people
You're
knew that I'd lived a clean life, and I wasn't that, you know um what's the right word, too square of an individual. I'd like to have fun, but it was always to a limit. It was always be, hey, Cosmin, sorry that we used inappropriate words. And so, like, they knew that I was a person of faith, and they shared the fact that, hey, this is my passion, but my love is the Lord. And so, I
wow.
witnessed it wherever I could around that aspect. And so, and that's what I always encourage, those that are involved, young people, and those that, kind of reach out. Hey, again, how do I balance that? I said, hey, there shouldn't be a divide. It should be woven together. When faith is at the core of your principles, of how you do business, of how you do, if how you show up every single day, not only will you be noticed, but people admire and promote.
That's awesome. So I think I think it's awesome that you highlighted that, because I feel like when you left Detroit, you could have easily kind of left behind the work that you're doing there, the church, and finally said, "Oh, I can finally just focus on business." Of course, in Dallas there was churches, and what's really cool is that you went there and didn't skip a beat. It sounds like you got involved. So tell us
Yeah,
exactly
yeah,
what exactly happened in
absolutely.
Dallas at the
You know,
church.
I've always had, so when, it came to Dallas, got involved in a local church for a couple of years, again, I knew I needed to rebuild. Many individuals, when they move from one church to another, they fall victim to what they're comfortable with in their old church, but they don't realize like this new church is a new community, it's a new body. And so I always had like a mentality of like, the gospel never changes, but the people, the methods, the environment, you know, be, be, um, be aware, be self-aware of that. And, I would seek the Lord and say, Lord, like, how should I serve this church and the people here? And so that's what in Dallas really helped, establish their, we'll say, worship ministry there, and even helped, some young people. We kind of did like a mini conference there because again, like I love doing conferences and events, right? And so we started a couple of things there locally. So always, applying the skills and the talents of professional world to ministry. And, so often I've seen individuals that were extremely successful in their professional world and unfortunately gave scraps or less in ministry because they were too busy or whatever it was, right? And so to me, it was always, I would feel guilty if I didn't give the same quality and the same level of dedication and passion, because if in me serving the Lord, I give little, why do I deserve, what he's given me, when it comes to a career and a profession and obviously, financial aspect and, lifestyle aspect. So to me, it was the least I could do is to serve God as much as possible. And so, that was just it's always been my mindset and, that of our family. My wife serves in ministry, our daughter serves in ministry. And so, but we're becoming more and more intentional with the type of ministry that we're a part of.
I bring that up because many times I have run across people that were involved in ministry, and they kind of use that to propel them again in the forward in the professional world, almost like put them on their resume. I was even asked if I can use Charity Cup and other ministries I was involved in to put on my resume, and I said, yeah, sure, but never returned back to the ministry. They got into the corporate world or business or
Mhm.
whatever, became successful, never looked back. But somehow you did, and I think
Yeah.
that shows the true love, which is serving others and really faith. And I think that's what's amazing, and that's the way I've
Yeah.
always known you. And the story continues.
Yeah.
Just real quick before we jump into sort of maybe the next chapter, I want to ask you. So in Dallas, what exactly? So you started a worship ministry there. So
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
there
So
one before?
I was primarily involved in helping with the worship, I'll say reestablish a worship ministry there. What does that mean? The the basics, how do rehearsals run? Like, what's the vision? What's the purpose? How do you join? What kind of people should be a part of worship ministry? Like, even before you pick up the mic or the
Yeah.
instrument, like, what is your why? And that's always been a core of, ministry for me because, um, again, mindset of if I give 100% to my career and profession, like I need to, and there's a why of that for me, right? To, to be purposeful in what I do, to provide for family, things like that. For ministry, it's because I want to serve the Lord and I want to make an impact uh, for those that either come or we reach out to get to know Christ, right? And
Yeah.
so like that's intended purposes. So I kind of reestablished that at that church, and we also, because we were about an hour or so away from the church, we decided at one point to also become a part. About 2 years, we were a part of an American church that was a little bit closer, and again, just more for a curiosity standpoint as well, because throughout my whole adult or throughout my whole life, together with our family, like we always went to the ethnic Romanian church, but we always had a curiosity of how others worshipped, and we would visit other churches frequently. I know, in your community, right? Like we'd love to, we always loved experiencing how other people worship, and so. And so we went to an American church for 2 years, and before in 2014 we moved to here in San Antonio.
Okay, very cool. So since you brought up San Antonio, maybe continue us on this journey after. I
Yeah,
assume that's what
yeah,
moved
and I think
behind.
yeah, and as if you're still here with us and listening, there's a method to this approach, right? And as I kind of mentioned early on, the thread of loving what you do, God opens up the doors for opportunity, and being faithful to Him in that, He opens up the doors of opportunity. And so, I had a short stint at RadioShack Corp. So the actual corporate office was actually in Fort Worth, Texas. They were on their, we'll call it their last leg. I had a friend that basically established their social marketing practice there, and they're like, hey, he actually got a new job at a tech company, and he told me about it. He's like, hey, I'm leaving. They need someone like you to really help take them to the next level, because he did what he could, but someone to take it to the next level. And so when I joined, in the 2.5 years I was there, I think I went through 4 CEOs. it, you
They're
know
really
it,
trying
it
to
like
reinvent themselves.
yeah, they're trying to really invent themselves. We actually had a chief marketing officer that joined that I worked for. She actually convinced them to do a Super Bowl commercial, and so they spent a pretty penny because they were trying to rebrand themselves. And so I was a part of another initiative there. That's actually a whole other story. We actually did what was called a social command center, where I had a team of everybody involved in digital. So we're talking social media managers, we're talking those that do display ads, search engine marketing, even corporate communications, PR, anybody. Like when we launched the Super Bowl commercial in 2014, February 2014, uh, we actually rehearsed. I made the team rehearse. Once the the TV spot aired, we actually turned on everything digital, because nobody knew that we were going to do a Super Bowl commercial. And for those of you that understand, marketing advertising, there's a huge there's a huge deal as Super Bowl comes up with advertisers of like who's advertising and what's going to be the coolest commercial and blah blah blah, right? And so we really held our cards close, and no one knew about it, not even the advertising press and all that stuff. And so when it released, it shocked everybody, because again, like Radio Shack is a dying brand and blah blah blah. And so we really went with a bag, and within 7 seconds after the spot finished, because we had a link and what to do next, we were on everywhere. And so we rehearsed it, and we had an amazing team where we had, like, I don't know, 30 screens, and we were following what people are saying. We were commenting or research. It was incredible. And if you follow me on social media, on Instagram at Cosguru, by the way, COSGURU on Instagram, I actually have a couple pictures from that experience. So check that out.
We're gonna try and put it in the description. If it's possible to send it to us, we'd love to put it up.
Yeah, yeah. You can find me anywhere, by the way, on social media at Cosguru, COSGURU.
Thank you. Awesome. I'm gonna have your name in the description here. But
Yep.
so you're telling me you sort of had a little bit of an unlimited budget and to lead a whole entire army.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it unlimited. I would call it a very intentional budget. And but that case study, right, and we actually, a lot of the media outlets said like the Radio Shack won the Super Bowl because we were the most shocking of everybody. And so there's a lot of great success. The stock actually went up. I think it was about 12% for a couple of days. And so everybody was like super excited. But that case study, I was actually invited to speak at an industry conference, and like how that happened to help others learn.
Wow.
And the company, the financial services company USAA, it's basically a auto insurance or insurance company and bank company for the military and their families. They were in attendance. It's actually a 100-year-old company, incredible, based out of San Antonio, Texas, and their head of kind of marketing and social at the time was there. And, they kind of came up to me and they're like, hey, we're going to post this job that I think you can help us with. and so that's how I
Wow.
started at USAA, and relocated me to San Antonio. Again, having to establish something that's never been done before, and I was basically tapped on the shoulder to help establish their broader social media strategy at this company, and basically all the content, and it went to eventually a broader role, where I managed more of. We'll call it the brand advertising budget and everything else, and a budget of a few tens of millions of dollars. But like that's all part of corporate, right? If you work for these big firms, you could have billion-dollar budgets, but advertising budgets. But you have to really be careful in how you deliver on that. But I did that on at USAA for about 8 years, and then that went up to COVID, and in 2021 I left for we'll call it was a publicly traded company in online. It was an online school, not homeschooling, not public school, but somewhere in the middle. And you can follow me on LinkedIn. You'll see it. But was basically asked to really go beyond just social, but also their content and digital kind of head up. And so I did that for a couple of years, until they kind of reorged. Got a small little package, and then kind of to today, over the past few years, where I went on this pursuit of how do I share this knowledge with small to medium sized businesses as a fractional executive leader. So that's
So you started
that's
your
what I
own
want to pursue.
company.
Yeah. So, it's a solopreneur business, to be a fractional executive, specifically marketing, right, and really specializing in digital and content, advertising, things like that. Just the whole spectrum of leading marketing for a small to medium sized business. And on the side, also, a lot of my friends that are in my network, professional network, they're like, Cosmin, that sounds really interesting, because we're kind of in this season where, we're not young anymore, and we'd like to pivot to something else. And how did you do it? And that's what kind of led to me helping teach other corporate professionals who are either looking to make a transition to be a fractional leader, or want to build something on the side as they're considering making a transition, either early retirement or something else.
So fractional, because I looked a little bit
Fractional
into it,
Officer,
and I
yeah. FractionalOfficer.com, yeah.
fractional officer, which is again forward thinking, because that's a good
Hmm.
name.
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe if anybody from the audience has that type of a role, please reach out to Cosmin. Is that a possibility?
Yeah,
Uh,
no, go to FractionalOfficer.com. I actually have an opportunity where you can download, like, a free, it's called a free proposal template. So many people, like, if you're in a consulting world or anything like that, once you get your first client, it's like, okay, how do I sign the dotted line, or what do I actually do? And so I've actually provided a free template of how to do a proposal. You just kind of download it, Word document, quickly tweak it to your business, and whatever your offering is, sign and go, right? And so it's been it was an effective tool for me. I'm not a lawyer. Make sure that you verify it with your lawyer, and ensure that it's correct for you and your business. But it's actually one of my top downloaded free tools that I provide there.
so they can still join if they wanted to. I think it's a network, right?
Yeah, it is. So basically, on LinkedIn, we're actually the largest LinkedIn group right now of fractional executive leaders. There's over at this time of recording about close to 2,300. That's a part of that LinkedIn group. A lot of great, leaders that are a part of that and engage, and others connect with one another. And then also, obviously, at FractionalOfficer.com, I help individuals with like the foundation of building their fractional executive business. And so it's basically a seven module course, video based, self-paced, where once you enroll, you can use it, and really to help establish you to establish your business, get that first client, and build from there. And so that's something it's like I said, it's self-service. And also, I'll put this little teaser, because we live in the world of AI. After I left that company, for about the past 3-4 years, just like social was before and web was before, I've really leaned into how to leverage AI for businesses. And so The course itself, you'll notice, is actually an AI avatar of me with my custom voice. And so, some people are like, hey, that's kind of impersonal because it's not you. But the advantage of that, and I believe this is where e-learning is going to go to very quickly, is the industry is changing quickly. Instead of me having to reshoot, re-edit, etc., I just update some text, an audio sample, and it renders a whole new video in less than an hour. And so in less than an hour, I can have a 30-minute piece of content. And so it's a fantastic way to make sure that the course is up to date with the latest and greatest to help the individual succeed.
So it's again sort of you forward looking and thinking, how to do this
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah. If if anybody's interested, I know AI is a longer conversation. Love it or hate it,
yeah.
we need to get used to it. And so, how we leverage that as a society in our business, corporate world, personal, etc., it goes beyond ChatGPT. And so, there's content, there's AI automation agencies now, there's AI agents, there's AI employees. There's so many things now that we're just early on in leveraging AI to create. And that's what I love about it so much, is that you can create content unlike ever before and quickly. And of course, you can also sniff out what's AI, what's not. So, but that window is getting narrower and narrower every single day.
Right. Yeah. Cosmin, I'm used to calling you Cos just because back in the day, but Cosmin. So the fractional, if somebody wanted to do this, essentially a fractional CEO or executive is somebody that sort of wants to give part of their time to a company,
Yeah,
either in the marketing or CEO or COO role. And
that's right.
if you're in that arena, Cosmin has some great resources for you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you are in a position currently of leadership within a company, because you need to be able to, manage others. The top fractional roles right now are fractional financial officers, FCFOs, FCMOs, chief marketing officers, chief operating officers, chief technology or information officers, and then some chief legal officers, and kind of go down from there. Fractional CEOs are less, just because of the nature of boards and things like that. But it's, in essence, you are providing leadership to a company for a specific area of the business at a fraction of the time. And
Right.
so as a business owner, and as a business owner, in order for me to hire somebody to the level of an executive, you're looking at, six figures up, right? It's a big expense, and beyond this annual salary, if anybody's in business, you have the benefits and all of this, right? Retention, blah, blah, blah. But like, you're basically, for a certain period of time. And ideally, and that's kind of what I talk about at FractionalOfficer.com, you can start with a 30-day engagement. Ideally, you're in a 9 to 12-month engagement. And that way, you can balance 2 to 3 clients a year and significantly do better than a full-time role, and typically, 10 hours per client.
Yeah, and on top of it, kind of leverage what you've learned, and so you're helping them
Yeah.
sort of you're giving them tools to learn. If you're in an executive position and now you want to maybe be more on your own, you're giving them the opportunity to sort of go on their own and leverage this learning curve
Yeah,
that they had.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
So check it out. If you're in that arena, this would be a great tool for you. Just say fractional.
Yeah, FractionalOfficer.com.
Check it out. I don't know. Maybe there's somebody in the audience that say, "Hey, this is perfect for me." But Cosmin, just going back a little bit, so we kind of moved to San Antonio. It sounds like what happened with the sort of the spiritual side of things or the ministry
Yeah.
side of things? Maybe if you can help us with that.
Yeah, so in San Antonio, we took a few months to kind of pray. There's a couple of Romanian churches at the time in the area. We definitely wanted to be integrated with the Romanian community here. And eventually we settled at the church called Bethany Romanian Church here in San Antonio. And, the church at the time was actually still renting out some space. They were in the middle of building the new sanctuary. And in 2015, as a matter of fact, they opened up the new sanctuary. And this November is our 10-year anniversary since we've been in the building, by the way. And so was, the community here in San Antonio is the Romanian community. The church that I go to, I think, was founded originally in 2006. So they were small until about 2011, 12 or so. Some folks started moving here, et cetera. But really, during COVID and post-COVID, like that 2020 to 2022, the ethnic Romanian church here, grew from about, I remember in the General Assembly meeting in 2019, we're like 220 members, and now we're over 500 adult members. And so it like significantly grew because a lot of change, a lot of movement of folks in the community. But I got involved, right away. And where there was a need, and began in the worship ministry side of things, kind of helping to build a worship ministry. Eventually, responsible for the music department for a short period of time, and just kind of driving that department forward. Working with others, a lot of great talented folks, and then in 2019, pivoted to say, hey, my whole career has been around, media, advertising, technology, etc. How do I put that to use fully to the ministry? And so I pivoted to really launch the media ministry at our church. And being an ordained minister, being a part of the church leadership level, if you will, in media ministry, and really strategically saying, how do we share the gospel outside of our walls to the world that is watching? And so we have a purpose, a vision, a strategy, and so on. And that media ministry is basically your audio, your video, your projection, your production, things like that. And in 2023, we're fortunate for the church to align to a vision of creating a broadcast studio. So we're one of the few churches in the Romanian churches in America that actually has a dedicated live stream broadcast room. And then earlier this year, we launched a podcast studio where we have a dedicated studio room where we record podcasts like this, but in a studio setting. And so when, visitors come, or, we have conferences or events, we book the guest or the group or whatever for a quick 1-hour podcast episode and recording, and have talented individuals within our team that produce it and are able to do it. I can't do it all. Again, like I work, and I love to work with talented people and bring them together for a purpose. And yeah, you can check it out if you go to any podcast platform right now. Spotify, Apple.
Please.
Sorry to take away from this podcast.
No, not a problem. Actually,
but I think
want to be
we
a
have
multiplier.
Yeah. But just check out Bethany San Antonio keyword. And it's optimized for it to quickly show up. Obviously, YouTube, that it's video recorded, and then we just distribute the audio version on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But yeah, check it out on YouTube. Check out Bethany San Antonio podcast. You'll see it. We already have a few episodes, and some folks that have really never been on a podcast before, and so it's great to help build that ministry as well.
And we are going to put a link below with that, because I want people to go there. We want to be a multiplier here. That's what we're about it, as a ministry. But I wanted to tell you, as I was listening and we were talking in the extent of this podcast, I mean, what one of the words or thoughts that kept on coming is you're building teams. And when it started with the worship team in Bethesda and Detroit, you were building a team, and then you removed yourself, and the team continued, and then you started another team and another team, and then when you got to San Antonio, you started another team, not only on the worship side, sounds like, but also on the podcast
Yeah,
side.
on the media side, yeah, we're a team of I think 30 plus volunteers that, scheduled, not all of them at every single service, but we kind of rotate through. We actually last Saturday we did our first workshop, like audio workshop, and so part of our broader vision is it to actually at one point create a Romanian media and production conference. To kind of bring us together here in the U.S. I think, for those that are watching in Romania, I know there's a lot of those are already happening in Romania. Why not do it here in the
Yeah.
U.S.? We need to, continue to excel in that, no matter what church you go to, because, that leveraging the power of content in today's world is the megaphone of how we can spread the gospel. And so, I know in recent events, right, the figure of like Charlie Kirk, right? He under there's a lot of positive things that he did, but why I think that ministry will continue and that movement will continue is because of the content that he did. He was constantly videotaped, and folks in his industry in his organization were, and so that's how you spread the message. And so why shame on us as people of faith to not leverage that in the right way?
100%, 100%, and I think again shows that you're sort of forward thinking. What the other thing that comes to mind in these teams, there's people. In order to build strong teams, you need to be able to see certain gifts and talents in people and put them in the right spot, and then encourage them and water them, right?
That's right.
And that's where I see you as a very strong force, because you have to be somewhat selfless to do this. And that's why I connect with you. And I believe that's what godliness is about. It's not about, hey, I want to lead this team and I'm going to be up front. Eventually, I want to work myself out of a job. So when I leave, there's a team left behind. What that takes watering. That takes probably seeing somebody that maybe sings great, okay, and encourage them to have more courage to sing great, or more than that, to worship God, to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I see you doing that, and then I see you probably doing it all the way. And I can imagine here at this technology team that you brought together, there's probably a lot of young people that are like, I'm not good at, what could I do at the church?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
You're like, hey,
mm-hmm.
you can do this.
Yeah.
Come, I'll show you.
Yeah.
That's how I view you, and that's how I kind of know you.
Mm-hmm.
You have anything to say about?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're spot on. I think, and I mentioned this earlier, right? Like I didn't have a special musical calling in my life, but my heart was to build others up so they can in turn inspire and influence others to worship the Lord, right? And it was the same in the media side. Like I've been through experiences in my life and career that God has opened up incredible doors that even to this day, when I reminisce with my wife, like how I got there, I have no idea. Learned that, got that skill, etc. But like I'm now applying that to these individuals in ministry and saying, hey, do this, think about this, use this tool, like, and build them up and encourage them, and not only to serve in church, but to build life skills for, for them and, and their future. But yeah, to me, my focus was always, how do we establish something that hasn't been done before, and have individuals that raise their hand and say, I want to learn, I want to get involved, bring them together, identify the ones that are really have a calling for that, lean in more to them to build them up as leaders. To your point, get yourself out of a job. And it's really the Jesus principle, right? Where he loved all, was close to 12, was closer with 3, right? And when he left, here we are today.
Exactly. So I that's the way I know you, and I know that's what it takes to build a team that are successful. You got to be selfless and look beyond that, and do it for the right reasons, which And I think you have that perspective. That's why I think you're very appropriate for this podcast. Make your life count. We very much believe in investing in people and their talents and watering
Hmm.
them, because some people don't even know they have that talent. Somebody needs to come along and water them instead of saying, "Hey, no, I got this. I got this. I got everything."
Hmm.
It takes a special character to say, "No, you know what? I want you to be the one leading this right now," and
That's right.
knowing when to do it. Cosmin, the other thing that comes to mind, and I know you and I we spoke about podcasts, and now you're kind of slowly becoming a guru in that. I know you gave me some great pointers. If there's somebody else that maybe has something on their heart and they want to start a podcast, to my detriment, just kidding. Reach out to Cosmin. He can give you some great tips. I'll be happy to help, but I think he's a great source. Why not? Why not have more Romanian podcast? Why not have more evangelicals get in and share the gospel with people in this way, or encourage people in this way? We certainly don't have. I think that's great for that to
Hmm.
happen. And so feel free to reach out to Cosmin. Also, I know I had a friend of mine that I've already recommended him to you. You're gonna like him if he reaches out. He's a really powerful guy,
Awesome.
and I hope he does a podcast. He wants to do one. Actually, he simply just wants to share people's like how they turn their life to Christ. That's
Hmm.
it. I said reach out
Yep.
to Cosmin. He's great. So anyway, sorry, I wanted to do
Yeah,
that
no,
for.
I thank you for that. I know we've talked a little bit too. I'm Romanian. I'm American. I'm scrappy, right? And to me, I like to test first before, you really invest. And so, I got recommendations for anything, if you want to start under $100, or if you want to get up to tens of thousands of dollars, right? To start. I highly encourage, any individual that wants to start. The starting is the easy part, because you're excited about the gear, you're excited about learning how to put together, you're excited about hitting that record button, getting that first one. uh, but the resilience to maintain a podcast until you really start seeing an impact is what separates those that are just tinkering and those that are successful. And so I really encourage anyone, and I know, Dan, I told you to kind of think about that 50 episode level. Most podcasts, before they break through and viewership and views and everything else, they'll need to have at least 50 episodes. So keep that in mind to anybody that's listening. You need to do it. You're going to learn for the first 50 episodes, and it's going to get better and better and better. And, if you have the right niche, the right content, the right topics, there's so many resources out there of how to do it right. But at the end of the day, it's going to be your resilience. And I know, as ethnic Romanians and beyond, and, Eastern Europeans, Moldovians, Ukraine, right? Like, we're gritty people. So, yeah, I'm excited to see the content that we're going to be producing.
Very awesome, Cos. Um, so I think in this sort of period of your life until now, I'm sure you have probably bigger plans from here on out as well. I really hope God continues to use you as He has. I love the fact that you always kept this eternal perspective, no matter where you were in life, and even during midst of success, because many times that's the hardest time to stay close to God. It's not through pain, because we always stay close to God through pain and by default, but I think that's really cool that you were able to manifest this. So if you were to give some advice to people starting out and that wanted to invest their life in sort of godly things and eternal things that last forever, it's probably a habit. What would you suggest, or what would be your advice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my advice is to not get caught up in the hype, but really seek the Lord in your closet, and really just come before Him, and even if you're starting out, say, Lord, like, I have this idea, I want to do this. Make sure it's from the Lord and not from your ambition. uh, and and start there. And but start, and you will fail, or I should say, you'll have a lot of lessons learned in the beginning. In the the last hour and a half or so that we've had conversations, I think I've spoken primarily of successes and positive things, but it would probably be another hour, hour and a half of the valleys that I've been through together with family. And there will be the valleys, but as long as you are stay close to the Lord and His Word, uh, He will guide you. And I've witnessed that in my life, where my prayer has always been, Lord, like, help me step in your steps, not in my steps, in everything that I do, both professionally and from a ministry perspective. And God opens up doors. And I think my life is a testimony of, I started as this kid that wanted to draw cars, and now God's led me to be able to work with incredible, highly intelligent individuals, and technology of AI and all of these things that I couldn't even have dreamed up 25 years ago. And so yeah, stay close to the Lord in your closet, and listen to his word, and step forward, keep stepping and keep stepping and keep going. And God will open up the right doors. And never forget that what you do, what he has put in you from a talent and capacity and a personality perspective for the world, don't limit it to the world. Make it count for ministry, make it count for serving, and make it count for others to come to know Jesus Christ.
Amen, amen, and awesome. I very much agree, and hope to multiply what you said. And thank you so much for sharing with us and inspiring us, and hopefully the people that have watched this. Cosmin, it was really great connecting with you here, and again, for kind of hearing a comprehensive story, because until now I maybe heard bits and pieces, but it was great to hear sort of all from you. Thank you for that. Thank you for, by the way, I meant to tell you this at the beginning, and I don't know if you remember, but when Charity Cup started,
Of
I
course, yeah.
believe you're one of the first donors.
Oh my goodness.
I don't know if you remember this.
No, I don't. I
Definitely
don't.
in
All
the
I know is
early,
I was
you're,
so excited for you guys. I was like, man, the Dans beat me to it, man. This is so cool.
well, um, yeah, man, I remember that. You and actually another Ruben Lupolescu,
Hmm.
when we
Hmm.
first did the first tournament, were one of the people that I mean, one that donated, I believe, and kind of encouraged us on this
That's
tough
awesome.
journey at that time, and that meant a lot to us.
Mm.
Because yeah, so thank you for that. It kind of ties into this podcast, and here we are many years later talking about it. God bless you. God bless your family. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
with us. And hopefully we'll do another maybe update in the future. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I love talking about, ministry, about technology, and more importantly, like how they kind of intersect. So I love chatting about this all the time.
Very good. Very good. To all of you that follow us along, that have followed along in this podcast and others, thank you so much. Thank you for being here, and thank you for making life count. I hope you've got a lot out of this podcast and the ones to come. God bless. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.